birthday.
How did you like the end of Crime Punishment? Because I was excited for you to finish it.
Are you referring to the epilogue or the end? Because you spoke highly of the epilogue prior to me reading it.
Just tell me about both. Tell me about the last page, and then tell me about the last page of the epilogue.
Okay. So go do a little rewind. I just started my other books and a little rewind. I remember the last page of the epilogue. He got transferred to a jail in Siberia, and it was just his experience. His love, Sonia, moved from Petersburg to Siberia to be with him. Although she's not actually with him, she still visits him and takes care of him from jail. And it could be almost like a side theme, like her love and her passion for Raskolnikov. Although he confessed to a murder, such a devious action. I find it crazy how she can still forgive him after such a thing and go out of her way to move to Siberia to support him, even though she knows that she won't be with him outside of jail for 12 years, and it's just.
Do tell me, did this love interest know of the murder before he confessed?
Yes. Sonia, ironically, was the first individual that he told about the murder, which is a bit odd. It was almost like an impulse action as well. I mean, all of his decisions were off of impulse. It was just a recurring theme throughout the book, but it was so heavy on his chest that he had to tell somebody, and he couldn't trust his family because they were suspicious of him, and he went off on a rant to them earlier, and he wasn't talking to them. He left his family. It was just him. The only person he had in his life was Sonia, so he had to tell her. And it was only a day or two before his confession that he told Sonia, but he just needed to get it off his chest before confession.
Do you think?
He didn't want her to find out the hard way. He wanted to tell her.
Do you think it could have done with love too? Like because he loved her, he wanted her to know beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could almost argue that it eases the pain a little bit if you tell someone something before it happens. Like, say, just like in my own life, say I get in trouble, and I know my parents are going to find out about it. I tell them before, so I get in less trouble. It's the same thing. He's telling her, so she at least has that trust in him that he will tell her everything in his life, whether it be good or bad. So,
because it's like you confessing to your parents that you did this thing, rather than the school being like, blah blah blah, Sam did blah blah blah.
And I'm not hiding anything. They know that.
Yeah.
And it could ease the pain. You know what I mean? So.
Because it shows you're taking responsibility in your actions and you're confessing.
And that you acknowledge that what you did was wrong. And he does acknowledge that what he did is wrong, and which leads to his inevitable regret.
Gradual renewal of man.
So shall we start the podcast officially?
Yes, we can start. Tell me about the setting.
Yeah. Setting. This is a Russian novel, not the setting. This is a Russian novel, and it takes place in mid-1860s Petersburg, in a time where money was scarce and people were desperate.
Okay. So there was like rundown homes,
a lot of poverty, a lot of crime.
Okay.
A lot of crime.
A lot of crime.
Yeah. And overall, it wasn't a pleasant place to live. He could have been a sum of his surroundings, you could say.
Yeah. Just tell me a little bit about your main character and the conflicts that arise.
Okay. Yeah. Regarding to Raskolnikov,
the main character,
indefinitely. Maybe what you won't think initially is that you might think he's desperate and that he doesn't have manners and he's not respected, and that's what leads him to these crucial, just like terrible actions. But he is a well-renowned student who has been publishing articles for years now, and he's regarded as a scholar all across Petersburg. The conflict arises due to his lack of funds for university. His eagerness to learn is so strong that he realizes he's willing to do anything to suffice his shortcomings with money. So
Is
that's what eventually leads to the conflict.
is his family supportive of him? Not the conflict.
His family, I don't remember the exact town that they live in, but he moved to Petersburg to pursue his education. So he is alone, and his family's in like Eastern Russia around there. I forget exactly where it was, but so they're not with him, and they still send him letters. They're keeping in touch, but it was he committed this action in a time where he wasn't with his family, and I think if he had lived with his family in Petersburg, the outcome of the story could have been totally different. So
what was the conflict? You mentioned how there was a conflict that arose from because of his his pursuit of knowledge.
His pursuit of knowledge and his shortcoming of funds to push through that knowledge.
What was the conflict? Like, what happened because of that?
He stopped receiving payments from his family because they couldn't suffice his education anymore, and he couldn't get a job and pursue his education simultaneously. So he had to make a decision, and his decision ended up being crime.
Tell me about that crime. What did he do after he realized that he had to do something to take action to gain funds?
So right around this time when he's finally acknowledging that his shortcomings are really like severe, and he can't do anything. He's either gonna have to drop out of university or find a way to get the money. So he chooses Plan B. And wait, what was it? It was
His crime.
his crime. Oh, okay, so he auctioned off all of his products to a woman named Alionia, and this was to continue his education for the months that he had. And after he had auctioned off all of his products, he only had one left. It was this watch he had from his mom, right? And he figured he can't auction it off because then he'll have nothing left. But he makes a decision, and it's impulse. He did think about it prior to doing it, and he thought about it for a couple of days, and it haunted him because he wasn't an evil person, and it really took control of his mind. This thought, and this thought happened to be that if he murdered this very wealthy pawnbroker, Alionia, he could take all of her money and her goods, auction them off himself, and right, like just like that, he'd be back at university, right?
So did he auction his mom's watch?
Let me get to that.
Okay, sorry.
So he uses the watch as the bait, you could say. So the one day he goes to Alionia's house, he knocks on the door, blah, blah, she opens the door, okay. He stole an axe from the kitchen in his little condo, and he's hiding it under his jacket, right? And at this point, he's freaking out because this isn't him. This isn't his nature, and he's freaking out. This isn't how he expected it to go,
His
right?
thoughts, like the nervous thoughts.
As he got there, he's like, I truly didn't think about how I would feel at this situation. But at this point, he had restole an axe, so that's one crime. He stole. And he's like, I'm too deep into this at some point, and I just have to. I have to go through with it. So he knocks on the door. Eleanor, I have a watch to pawn off to you, okay? So she goes to her chest to get the money, and as she's going to the chest, he makes the impulse decision, and he goes through it. He takes the axe out, and he chops her over the head with his axe.
So he didn't think. He
just before he thought, which we'll get to. And subsequently, as he's collecting all the stuff from her and her dead body, all of her riches, everything around her, her chest and everything, her sister Elizaveta, a well-respected lady in the town, a very nice lady, unlike her corrupt pawnbroker sister, Alionia, she was just very well-respected, had very good manners, everything. And as she walks in, she sees the body and freaks out. She freaks out, okay? And she walks in, she's a couple of feet in, she freezes. And he makes a decision. He goes, he's either going to get caught if she doesn't kill her, or he's going to kill her, and he could go through with his plan. But this wasn't part of his plan. He didn't account for any, details that might be missing and whatnot. So he takes it upon himself to kill her as well, same way that he killed Alionia.
Yeah, I mean, what else can he do? He's got to hide evidence.
Yeah.
But that's like, that probably mess with him.
That's what messed with him.
Because like, the Aliona murder was kind of unpremeditated. It was kind of just, it happened.
He excused it in his mind prior to killing her. And he says this a lot throughout the book, and he says, I can live with the murder of Alionia. I can't live with the murder of Elizaveta. Because it wasn't justified. granted, none of the murders were justified, but that's what he tells himself.
Yeah.
He convinces himself, I'm going to kill her, and it's for the good. It's for the good of the people. She's not a good person. She's corrupt, and she was. And that's what he tells himself. He's doing the community good. But when Elizaveta comes in and he kills her, innocent woman. So, can't excuse it.
So, if you would let me proceed, would you, just real quick, would you be able to tell me a 1 to 2 sentence, like, summary, real quick, before I move on to the next question? I just want, like, a general
Summary, okay. It's basically everything we just went over.
Yeah,
I gave a good summary of at least the first half of the book, in which the murder is the prevalent theme, or not the theme, the prevalent act, like thing that takes place. You know what I mean? But it just, I said, respected scholar Raskolnikov is desperate to return to university. His desperation for the pursuit of knowledge leads him down a dark path of faulty decisions, in which mental torture haunts him. In the second half of the book.
The mental torture. So, to finish off your book, like the midway through, can you just tell me about the mental torture, and can you tell me a little bit about the punishment? Because we talked about the crime, but
Yeah.
about the punishment.
And you see, the crime is the obvious thing. It comes right to you. You don't have to dig deep to see it. But the punishment it's interpretational. But what I got from it is a couple really crucial quotes that really defined what he was going through following the murder. So on page 114, his guilt for the murder can be seen right away. Didn't take long for him to digest it. He says, he gets back to his apartment and he's in a craze. He's laying down in his bed and he doesn't know what to do. He's just thinking. If they question me, perhaps I'll simply tell. I'll go in, fall on my knees, and confess everything. So, his logic completely skewed. At this point, he doesn't feel worthy of just living in general, and he's having logical thoughts such as, I don't know, I shouldn't have done that. Maybe the right thing to do is confess to myself. But is it logical? It could be argued. Maybe he's just telling. He can't get a control of his mind. It's hard for me to get a control of his mind because he doesn't know what he's thinking. It's back and forth. At one point, he's like, "Oh, justified. I got the money at university," and then on the other hand, I don't know how I'm going to continue life.
I murdered someone.
I don't know what I just took two people's lives. Yeah, how am I accepted, and how am I going to accept myself? Yeah,
great point.
And an amazing quote. A couple pages later says. Now, if the whole room had been filled, not with police officers, but with those nearest and dearest to him, he would not have found one human word for them. So empty was his heart. It's so similar to the creature. He starts to tell himself that he doesn't belong, and he's not worthy of being, on the same level as his peers. And right after that says, if he had been sentenced to be burnt at the moment, he would not have stirred, would have hardly had heard the sentence to the end.
Could you say that Raskolnikov and Victor are similar? Because they're both pursuing knowledge.
Both pursuing knowledge, and I mean, the recurring theme of guilt has been a part of every book I've read so far. Everybody, whether it be a fiction novel, whether it be a non-fiction novel, whether it be us just talking.
It's cause and effect.
Everything's guilt. Whether it be something as, small as, oh, I shouldn't have said that in a sentence. I shouldn't have said that to my friend. It might have hurt his feelings. What, two, I shouldn't have killed that lady. Now I'm going to be tortured mentally for the rest of my life. Although the magnitude of each situation is different, guilt is just a recurring theme in life and in the books.
It's like you said, like you say something, you're like, I could have said something different, or you did something, and then the next night you're in your bed, you're like, why didn't I just do that? Yeah. And it's like he took the extreme. He killed someone, so he's in his bed, like he doesn't know what to think. He can't piece the puzzles together because he didn't even really think about it. Wasn't premeditated.
He can't think about what he thought prior to the murder because he wasn't thinking. Yeah. And that brings us to our next point: feel before thought. Very similar to Frankenstein once again. We can make 100 different connections, but important. Quote, about 150 pages later on page 267, it really narrates the idea of feel before thought perfectly, and that's why I was just so excited when I read it, and I was like, oh gosh, Mr. Arbato's gonna love this.
Yeah.
Why I did that and went there and said that, I can't clearly explain now. Actions are sometimes performed in a masterly and most cunning way, while the direction of the actions is deranged and dependent on various morbid impressions. It's like a dream. And this, especially the first one, it perfectly explains it. If I were to say something that hurt your feelings, why I did that, I went there and said that, I can't clearly explain. Now, I can't explain it. I don't know what I was thinking at the exact moment, and that's exactly what he's thinking. He doesn't know what he was thinking, and he's just appalled by himself, his past self, and he can't accept him anymore. So.
That's great. I mean, if you feel like you need to throw another quote in, please, but if not, I could just ask you, what are your main takeaways from the book?
Main takeaway, it's kind of simple, but I think it's overlooked a little bit. It's the importance of not reacting on impulse. But if you're anticipating a social interaction, just per se in our life, I like to do this in my own life. I like to think about what they might say to me, what I might say to them, and then so it helps them prepare, right? If you don't think about what could happen in the future, obviously you're going to say something you regret because you have a split second to think before you have to say something, and then you regret. But if you think beforehand and you're like, okay, I won't say this. Why would I say that? I'm going to say this. And you have a plan, and the importance of planning, it's just like, it's overlooked. And I think that was something I took away from the book. Although I may not have loved the book, there was some great takeaways and themes. So.
Like we were talking about at the end of the Frankenstein debate, like at the end of class, we were talking about how if you write an essay, you're like, I wrote a good essay. And then you get teachers back with a bunch of red marks on it, you're like, oh, I did do that wrong.
Because everything in the moment seems right.
Until
it turns left. And then you're like, oh,
in the extreme case, he didn't really have time to think.
He had to. He had to make a decision. And that decision haunted him.
And it was, whoa, this isn't like in the book. I just want to know, in your opinion, what do you think it was driven by? Like pure impulse? Do you think it was his subconscious mind telling him that, oh, this is okay?
It's weird. It is his subconscious mind somewhat, as he keeps telling himself, it's justifiable that I do this in order to achieve a higher power. I don't have the quote exactly, but around, I don't know, the mid part of the book, this is the biggest incriminating evidence against him. A man named Porphyry, I wrote about him. He was the investigator pursuing him in the case, and he said Raskolnikov in his university had wrote an article about the necessity of some people to access crime. It was something along those lines, and it actually was very interesting. I would love for someone to actually write an article about it in real life and not just in a book, because I think it's very interesting, and it's a great topic because the people like Napoleon, super well renowned nowadays, and people like Savior of France, this, that, whatever, murdered millions of people, murdered thousands of people, and to think of him as a hero, So, in Raskolnikov's case, he thought of himself as that higher power. And Porphyry's argument against him is, how can you differentiate between a higher power individual and an individual that's normal like us, that's a rule follower? And Raskolnikov can't answer it. He doesn't have an answer, and nor do I. But he just had an innate feeling that he was one of those higher power individuals, and that crime was justifiable for him to reach a higher power, higher goal, like university and then beyond. So, I thought that was very interesting. Was that about takeaways?
That was about takeaways.
Wow, okay.
We could finish it off. Give me your opinion, your ratings, and your recommendations. Just like throw it all together. Give me it all.
Would I recommend it to the average reader? No.
Well, who's the average reader?
Someone looking for enjoyment in a book.
Okay.
I'll go put it that way. If
Okay.
someone's looking to enjoy a book as a form of entertainment and not so much to delve into the depths of the book, then yeah, I wouldn't read it. But if someone's looking to read a novel that they could truly dissect in the future, and as they're reading it, and truly, go back and read it and be like, wow, okay, I understand the true meaning of what he said here, then yeah, okay, it's great. There's a lot of deeper meanings within the book, that I probably don't even understand myself.
Yeah.
But that's why I try, because when I go back like this and I do a book talk or a podcast or writing, it helps me understand each chapter part of the book deeper, and I love it. I love going back and seeing what I took away from each part. Because when you're reading, it's like, okay, I'm reading, and it kind of goes over your head until you go back and you realize the true importance of it in comparison to like the plot and everything. So, would I recommend it? Probably not, but I gave it a 3 out of 5. It's just a mediocre book, in my opinion. Entertainment wise, if I were to rate it, I don't know, in a sense of like ingenuity and like how it transformed the time, because the fact that people are still reading it 160 years later, okay, so he had to have been doing something right. Okay, yeah, but in my personal opinion, I don't think it was amazing. I think he had such a great plot and an idea, but there was just a lot of unnecessary chapters and an unnecessary stuff that maybe I'm missing it, but I don't think had anything to do with the plot. And I'm not joking, there had to be at least 200 pages worth of it. And it's just like, it gets repetitive or it gets boring when you're reading something and you can't find out how it relates to the plot. It bothered me a little bit.
Do you think maybe if you were to reread it or re-examine it, that you could, like, because after you finish something, you know how it works. So do you think even this or like a book series, like, for example, Red Rising or a Game of Thrones, do you think you would understand the beginning more if you knew what happened in between?
There'd be a lot less confusion.
There'd be a lot
that much,
less,
and I would understand how he's building up on each thing he says in the beginning, rather than trying to find out what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would already know what he's saying because I read it, but it would help me see how he uses these building blocks. And when I'm reading it, I can't differentiate those building blocks because I'm trying to dissect what he's saying in the first place. You know what I mean? So yeah, if I did reread it, there's no doubt. It's like any book. Of course, I would find out more and I'd have a deeper understanding. But will I? Maybe 50 years from now, on a cold, dark night.
I mean, it's something to think about, though. Like, you do think about that one scene. It's not like it doesn't have a lasting impression, but sometimes you're just like, that was a pretty good scene.
It was a very good scene, and it's unfortunate it only lasted 20 pages before it got a little boring. But yeah. Besides that, my only real knock of I don't know, like my only I don't even know. The only downside of the book, in my opinion, really, is just the unnecessary chapters. I mean, it is slowly paced, but as I went over in one of my writings, he does a good job of making each chapter increasingly more interesting until it reaches the climax of each part, in which there's 6 parts. So if there's 8 chapters per every 6 part, the first chapter is boring, second, 1/3, whatever. 5 through 8 though, it starts to get interesting and it entices you to keep reading. And then once you get to the new part and you're at chapter 1 again, at least you're enticed to read because 5 through 8 were good at the last chapter, or the last part. So he does it well. He does an exemplary job of stacking his chapters, and I've never seen such a thing, but just a little too much. Like, it's just a bit unnecessary, some of the chapters. But that's my only knock, really. Welcome back, my fellow book lovers. It is Nick and I again. Instead of discussing Crime and Punishment today, we will be moving on to introduce your book.
The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov.
Another Russian literature novel, but different. It's different in its own aspect, and we're going to explain that today. So, Nick, first of all, knowing it's Russian literature, I'm curious as to what the setting is.
Okay, so it takes place in Russia around the same time as Stalin's reign, if you would call it, like his dictatorship. So it's a very oppressive dictatorship during the 1930s, 1940s, and the world was in a terrible place at the time. You got
World War II almost. You said 19?
Yeah, 30s, 30s, 40s. Stalinist Russia. You got Nazi Germany, the Holocaust, World War II, the Great Depression. Like, this was, I didn't realize it until I was looking at it the other day. That was a crazy time period, and it just took place under an atheistic Russia, the citizens of Russia were forced to be atheists. They couldn't believe in a religion, and they would be killed if they were seen
for believing in anything.
Yeah, believing in anything.
In a time like this, so gruesome. I mean, it's apparent that the devil will make himself prevalent. So my next question leads me to how does the devil make himself prevalent in a atheist Russia?
So he makes himself prevalent in atheistic Russia by trying to prove the existence of God and the devil. And himself. So I actually have many quotes. I could explain it throughout the story. I could tell the story in quotes and then explain what all the quotes mean.
Hit me.
So we start on page 8. There's a conversation between two men talking about Jesus Christ. And they're both atheists, but they both are uncertain of their beliefs. They're kind of forced to believe it, so they just believe it.
Yeah.
So the first quote: "You must agree that in the realm of reason there can be no proof of God's existence." Page 9. Also on page 9, "If there is no God, then one may ask, who governs human life and, in general, the whole order of things on the earth? Man governs it himself."
Yeah, and I could assume that Stalin almost perpetrates himself as God, and as he dictates everything. So continue.
Yeah, so the stranger, or as we now then the reader figures out, this is Professor Roland, which is actually the devil in this book, says that if there is no God, then one may ask, who governs things on earth? And then one of the two men, who are both atheists, one's a poet and one's an editor. And then the next quote I have: "Allow me to ask you then, how can man govern if he is not only deprived of the opportunity of making a plan for at least some ridiculously short period, we'll say 1,000 years, but cannot even vouch for his own tomorrow?" And then I have, so then Woolen goes to explain he creates like a scenario, a fictional scenario. He's like, if someone falls under a tram car, he says he slips and falls under a tram car, like a fictional person slips and falls under a tram car. Are you going to say that it is he who governed himself that way? Would it not be more correct that he was governed by someone else entirely? So if he slips and falls under a tram car, that's not really him who governs himself, because he wasn't really able to choose his own destiny in that sense.
As it was an accidental death.
Yeah. He wasn't able to choose his own fate.
But I mean, I don't know how much I agree with that. Almost, I know you're not trying to inform. You're just informing me something. You don't have a viewpoint per se, or you haven't explained that so far. But even the most religious of individuals, some died terrible deaths. So he says it's man who governs himself, but he's almost suggesting that if he were to follow God and believe in God, that something so terrible wouldn't happen, but it does. So I don't know how valid that man governs himself when he doesn't govern himself. How could that happen? But I don't know.
So then we have a quote by the stranger: "No brick will ever fall on anyone's head just out of the blue. In this particular case, I assure you, you are not in danger of that at all. You will die a different death." And then he begins to say, "Your head will be cut off."
The character that is acting as the devil says it.
The character who is the devil says that one of the men, Berlioz, will have his head cut off. So then we skip to page 43, the last of quotes for this little series. "The prudent Berlioz, though he was standing in a safe place, decided to retreat behind the stile, moved his hand on the crossbar, and stepped back. And right then his hand slipped and slid. One foot, unimpeded as if on ice, went down the cobbled slopes leading to the rails. The other was thrust into the air, and Berlioz was thrown onto the rails." And then later in the page, "The tramcar went over Berlioz, and a round dark object was thrown up the cobbled slope below the fence on the Patriarch's Walk. Having rolled back down the slope, it went bouncing along the cobblestones of the street. It was the severed head of Berlioz." So his head was cut off by a tramcar because he slipped and fell.
And what was in the devil's eyes? What did he do that was deserving of this?
There was nothing that was. Well, it's the devil. There's nothing that. He is no fair judgment. He is the ultimate evil. He does what he pleases. And he does this to show that there is an ultimate evil. And in the chapter before that, there was actually. The beginning was the first chapter. And when Berlioz actually died was the third. And the second, he explained, which was the second setting that I was going to say in the beginning. The second setting is the time of Jesus' death at Pontius Pilate, which is kind of like an overlapping story throughout the novel.
So it jumps back and forth between time
It
periods?
jumps back and forth between time periods.
And what do you think the author did this for? What to exemplify what?
I haven't finished, but I know that a character that gets introduced later on in the book, it's actually a book he wrote for his love, Margarita. But Margarita, I've just met. I haven't finished the book. So I don't know exactly why, but in this case, it could be used because the devil said, there's a quote, he said, Professor Wolin said to the two men, I was there at the time of Jesus' hanging. He never said.
Mr. Wolin said that.
Yeah, Mr. Wolin said that. He never said he was the devil. He just said he was there at the time of Jesus hanging. They're like, you're crazy.
Yeah.
There is no proof of God's existence. There is no proof of that.
Because they were indoctrinated to believe that.
Yes. Well, not really indoctrinated. They were kind of just like forced to believe it because.
Well, that's all they knew.
No, because they didn't want to get.
You think that's the only reason? If a kid grew up in that situation,
definitely.
he would have no other idea of any other possible reasoning. He wouldn't be able to form his own conscience.
That's
He
right.
would just believe what everyone else said.
Yeah, that's right.
But if they're older,
Yeah,
which
they're
I'm
older.
assuming they are, then yeah, they had their own beliefs at some point and had to betray those beliefs in order to continue living.
Mm-hmm. So I just thought that was crazy. How then he showed a proof of God's existence by predicting the death of Berlioz.
And did Berlioz's peers see this and like react somehow?
So the other guy, Ivan, the poet. So Berlioz was the editor and Ivan was the poet, and Ivan saw it happen, and then he went on like a rampage of just being nuts because no one else saw it, and he was trying to track this guy down. He was like,
Mr. Wolin.
He was trying to track down Mr. Wolin. Ivan was trying to track him down, and when he couldn't, he would tell people like, "Oh, he foresaw the future," and they'd be like, "You're crazy."
They probably thought he was as crazy as he thought Mr. Wolin
They
was in the
thought
first place.
he was the crazy guy,
Yeah.
because Mr. Wolin would get away with stuff because he was able to easily manipulate people. Because if he said something, the next day, it was actually something that happened. I don't have anything underlined because I wasn't going to speak about it, but it makes sense here. The fin director of like an amphitheater, so performing of whatever you want to perform.
Yeah. Okay.
He one day tried to get himself on that theater, so he would pay him and all that. He'd pay him so that he could perform. He would sign all the papers. So he made him sign all the papers. So Wolin himself, like, it's not said, but he did mischievous things. He got his signature. He got the money paid for. And then the next day, Stiopa, the leader of the fin director, was like, I have no recollection of what happened yesterday. And then he keeps seeing these things. He sees Professor Wolin's signature, and he's like, I never signed this.
So, I mean, he's almost dictating his own future, and no one can do anything about it, and no one knows, no one believes him, but with growing suspicion, do more people start to realize that he could be a devilish, figure?
No specific suspicion really arises. They kind of like...
Because they don't even believe in it to begin with, so they probably think it's just an anomaly of some sort. Yeah.
They don't believe in it.
And that's where you're at so far in the book?
That's where I'm at so far in the book, yes.
Okay. So far, you're about 2/3-ish.
Mm-hmm.
What are your main takeaways?
So the biggest takeaway is it's got to be the time period because of how much just reflects on it and how important this one chapter was. So there's this one chapter, chapter 15. It is a character named Nicanor Ivanich. It's his dream. It happens in a dream. So the dream, he is placed in like an area with a bunch of citizens of the Soviet Union, and he is in a room, and then there's someone on the stage announcing people to come up on the stage, and then the announcer on the stage announces Nikonor's name, and he says, "Confess your money, confess your valuables."
Confess your mind, confess your valuables.
Money.
Oh, confess your money.
Confess your money. So, I have a quote. The quote is reflecting on the USSR. So, after Nikanor goes, someone else comes up, and his name is Sergei Gerardovich, and it says, "Sergei Gerardovich, the master of ceremonies addressed him." So the master of ceremonies is just the guy who's calling up everyone names. "You've been sitting here for a month and a half now, stubbornly refusing to turn over the currency you still have, while the country is in need of it. And you have no use of it whatsoever, and you still persist. You're an intelligent man, you understand it all perfectly well, and yet you don't want to comply with me. To my and then the guy says, "To my regret, there is nothing I can do, since I have no more currency." So he denies the fact that he has any more currency.
But he does.
But he does, because his wife comes in right after. The master of ceremony says, "Let's welcome this woman." And his wife comes on the stage with all of his valuables, and he reads it aloud. And that just shows the betrayal of his wife, maybe to the forced oppression in the time.
Did she gain anything from this? Something possess her to do this?
We don't know.
It's unknown.
It's unknown. It could just be.
Could have been the devil.
Could have been the devil. It could have been the fear of what Joseph Stalin and his dictatorship, the government, what they could have done if they were hiding valuables.
Yeah, and money could do great things,
Yeah.
great or terrible things.
And right after, the master of ceremony says, "If you just confess your money, everything would be okay. But now you walk home, moneyless, with problems, with family problems."
Do you think he did the right thing in that situation? Instead of taking a safe route and admitting to his valuables, he played the hiding game.
He was just trying to live his own life.
And do what he thought was best.
Do what he thought was best.
So you can't mock him.
That's just my takeaway was the time period and how cruel the treatment was. How people were kind of just in constant fear. He's like, I don't know, he's literally lying, saying he has no value.
That whole time period is symbolistic of the devil itself.
Yeah.
Which could be like a sub-theme within the book. Just the fact that he tries to make himself prevalent to each individual, but even the whole time period, how just cruel it was. I mean, that's indicative of the devil himself. Too, so.
It's a satire. So I like how it's Joseph Stalin, one of the most ridiculous dictators in the world, one of the most known people, not for the book, and
Notorious.
yeah, there is just his oppressive rule. He is man, and he says no one can believe anything. Then the devil invades a terrible place to play a role that makes everyone believe that he's going against Joseph Stalin.
Yeah, it is comical when you look at it because he himself a terrible spirit or terrible figure is he's going into a land of already cruelty to make himself known in a world that's already cruel. So
It's just ridiculous.
it's not out of the ordinary if something crazy or cool happens because it was already like that. It's under Stalin's rule, let alone the devil.
And the book was considered immoral, rightfully so at the time. But the author Bulgakov finished writing this in 1940, died soon after, and they considered it immoral, so they never published it. In 1966, they finally published it, so we never got to see his book published.
Well, did they change it, or what are you saying?
They never published his book during the 1940s because they considered it immoral, and they wound up printing it and publishing it 26 years later. So he wrote it in secret. He wrote it in secret for I think it was 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I just thought that was crazy.
Okay, considering how long it took, how diligent he probably was in the creation of this book, what would you rate it out of 5 stars?
You know, it is written incredible. The way he puts two stories into one to make them make sense, which I have made somewhat sense of it, but I know at the end of it, and at the end of the book, it's obviously going to make the most sense. So I haven't finished it yet, but the writing is fantastic. It's not very enjoyable.
It's one of those books when you look back on it, you're like, wow, that was good to read, but when you're reading it, it's like,
It's
that's
a
slow.
little painful.
Yeah, I understand that.
And there's a lot of scenes that I will remember. Like some books, there's just forgettable moments. There's very memorable moments in here. It's just the journey it's tough. It's a boring read.
That's Russian literature for me.
So if I had to rate it right now, on my strict Goodreads scale, I'd probably give it a 2.
Which, if you equate it, would be about like 40 out of 100. Not great, but you also haven't finished it.
Yeah.
It could change. You could later read it, parts of it again and have a newfound appreciation. So, I mean, it doesn't outright mean the book is bad, it just means you haven't enjoyed it. And that's okay. So to conclude, we kind of already covered this a little bit, but would you recommend it?
That's tough. It depends what someone's looking for. If they're a reader and if they're looking for Russian literature, it's not very long. I mean, I don't know. I think I would recommend it, but I don't know if that would be my first recommendation.
I don't know.
I think if I'm trying to introduce someone to reading, I would never introduce the
absolutely.
Russian literature.
Yeah, you have to be deep into the rabbit hole to find yourself reading Russian literature.
But if someone were want to read Russian literature, I'd probably recommend them Crime and Punishment first.
Bold, bro.
Because they're all like that.
Right.
They're all like that.
And out of the ones that are like that, which is all of them, it's not terrible.
It's a good way to start.
It's a good way to start.
To see if you like it or not.
Yeah, and no, it definitely is a good gateway book. So, I would agree with that.
Okay, so we concluded my book, and let's go back to both our books. I'd like to ask this question first. We can both kind of throw at it, but first unit, we covered Frankenstein. How do we compare our books to Frankenstein? About our enjoyment and how much we liked it.
I mean, it's funny because when you read books from different parts of the world, you can see the discrepancy in writing styles, and it becomes evident.
Mhm.
Parts of the world are faster, parts of the world are slower and more. You have to, thought out. And it depends what you like. Me personally, I like the Frankenstein style more. I think it was quicker paced. I mean, every chapter there was something happening, and you didn't have to wait 100 pages for a climax. I mean, it was kind of back to back to back, especially towards the end, the last I don't know, the last stretch. I mean, it was very enjoyable. And if anyone asked me to recommend them a book, 100% Frankenstein. Crime and Punishment, I'd be a little more hesitant. And it's only because how difficult it is to read. And I understand Frankenstein uses a dense vocabulary, but it doesn't take a genius to to fill in the holes. You know what I mean? And that is part of the reason I would just recommend it to an average reader. They're both classics. Don't get me wrong, but overall, I'd recommend Frankenstein over Crime and Punishment.
Frankenstein names are a little easier too.
Tad bit easier to read.
And remember.
You
forget the characters, like.
Oh yeah.
So I will go after, but you could compare your ratings of the books. You could tell Mr. Beto what he gave Frankenstein.
I give it a 4 or 5.
You gave it a 5.
If I don't think I could put half on it. I'd probably give it a 4.5.
4.5.
4.5. And I'm not the most strict rater, so you could take it however you like, but I gave it a 4.5 out of 10, equating to about a 90%. In comparison to the 3 I gave to Crime and Punishment, solely because I covered this in the first section of the podcast, but solely because Crime and Punishment is just too slow for my liking. But I had to start somewhere in Russian literature, and seemed like a good place, and I don't regret it whatsoever. So, but yeah, overall, Frankenstein comes out on top about a star and a half higher than
Star and a half higher. Which,
Caramel.
if you do it out of 10, that's 3 points.
It's
And
not
if you
terrible.
do that after,
And I have good things to say about both books,
Mm.
but that's just my final rating.
final rating. Alright, so I'll begin with that. My rating of this, the incomplete book, because I haven't finished it, but I would give this about 1.5, 2 star. It's good, but that's a 2 is good. Which
2 is good.
I'll try and do it differently. So I'll do it out of 10.
I remember you trying to explain this thing a while ago. How you rate it? Yeah.
How I rate it.
Okay.
So maybe I shouldn't say.
Just give it a easy answer.
Oh,
Out of 10. Out of 10 stars.
I gave the Master Margarita 2 and I gave Frankenstein a 4. That's a big difference.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
very, very
It's a big jump.
big difference. And Frankenstein was just like Merry Christmas. Whereas I grabbed Frankenstein, Merry Christmas. If you don't want to read it, 180 page book, 200 page book.
There's no commitment.
There's no commitment.
Yeah.
And plus, chapter 5 is when that took off.
Yeah, I mean, even the first part was enjoyable too.
Yeah.
But as soon as it hit that, the creation of the creature, it was lights out from then. I couldn't put it down.
The letters were very entertaining, and then you got the first 2 chapters of the introduction. And chapter 5.
I remember asking him if I could read ahead because I was like,
Yeah.
this is terrible. I don't want to pick up another book, but I also want to read ahead. But I also don't want to be ahead of everyone because when he talks about it in class, I don't want to contribute to the conversation 5 chapters ahead of everyone. I don't know, so and so died, and everyone looks at me and like, oh crap, I should have said that. And then
So with the fact that we read Frankenstein in class and we did assignments like to learn epistolary style, we went step by step to read Frankenstein. Do you think we did that with Crime and Punishment to the point where you would be able to further dissect it? You would enjoy it more? Do you think it would be a better book, a better rating?
I mean, if Mr. Barbato were to dissect every part, every chapter would be a little much, but if every part, because there was about 8 parts, not only would my understanding be a little bit better, a lot better, but he probably would have put a new perspective to it, which would have made me have a newfound appreciation. But with that being said, the writing assignments did keep us accountable as well. So we were still keeping up with the book, and you still had to reflect on what you read, but not as step by step as Frankenstein. So I think if we did do that, maybe I would have appreciated it a bit more.
So we are getting ridiculously off topic, but do you think annotating, like writing stuff down, writing something, a little note, do you think that helps you
Underlining
retain
stuff?
information better?
I mean, the obvious answer is yes. But I feel like you only start to remember when you really go back and read it again. When I highlight something or underline something in my book, and then I continue going on and never go back to it, I'm not gonna remember that. I highlight a bunch of stuff. It's not like out of the ordinary. It's only when you go back and you read it again, based on what you've read. So say you go 100 pages ahead of that first thing you highlighted, and then you realize what he meant by saying that in the book. That's when you truly understand it and appreciate it. So I think just annotating in general, maybe it does help. Don't get me wrong, because you know where to look, but it doesn't help in the moment. You have to really go back in the future. That's my opinion. What about you? I know. You also like to annotate.
Yeah, I like to annotate. I mean, it makes parts more memorable. I find if I took a random book I've read and I'd be like, when did that person say that? I would have a general idea of when that happened.
Solely from the fact that you underlined something or highlighted something.
Like, when did, from the Brothers Karamazov, I won't say anything crazy, but when did, like, Father Zosimov say this? And I could have an idea, like, around page 100 to page 150. Like, I just have that idea in my head from a random example. And I think it helps you remember stuff better. and remember what was happening around that area.
It's fair.
And I think enjoyment also plays a factor in it too. If you're not enjoying something, you're gonna maybe read it with less
Intent.
less ardor. You're not gonna be like, oh, I really like this.
And I think annotating is indicative of your enjoyment of the book. If you find something uninteresting, unappealing to you, you kind of just be flipping pages. You're not going to be intent on
You're not like
dissecting
line by line.
Yeah.
You might even skip.
Oh,
Not like skip a line. Like your eyes might just be
wander.
like.
Yeah. So, those were our two big book talks: The Master of Margarita and Crime and Punishment. I really hope you enjoyed. We really hope you enjoyed listening to us. A bit longer than expected, but got to put all our ideas out there, so that's just how it is. That's how we wrap it up. We hope you have a good night, and see ya.